What's up, guys? Ted from Immersion here, and today I have a short little video here for you where I wanted to discuss two of the absolute most important rules in Dungeons & Dragons, one in Dungeons & Dragons in general, and one in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition that you may not be using or may just be unaware of. So this first one, it's really just a couple lines of text, but really big things that I think this is more for your dungeon masters out there, but right here, the D20. Does an adventurer's sword swing a hurt a dragon or just bounce off its iron-hard scales? Will the ogre believe an outrageous bluff? Can a character swim across a raging river? Can a character avoid the main blast of a fireball, or does he take full damage from the blaze? This is it right here. In cases where the outcome, this is page 7 of the Player's Handbook, where the outcome of an action is uncertain, the D&D game relies on rolls of a D20 or 20-sided die, a D20, to determine success or failure. So that right there, again, new DMs, old DMs, DMs in general. Because sometimes I've played in games where literally everything I do, the DM makes me roll. Like, I want to, walk down the street. Okay, roll a D20. Make me an acrobatics check. Make me an athletics check. I want to find something in my own backpack. Make me a perception check. Really? Like, it's my bag. If I open up my own bag and look in it, not a bag of holding, just a bag, and I'm looking for a notebook, it's either there or it's not. Like, I could dump the whole thing out and I'll find it. So, this is just, again, you only use D20 rolls when there's a degree of uncertainty. So there are a lot of simple things that a mundane person, you or I in our real world life, could easily do. So our characters should be able to do the same thing. Now, obviously, there's extenuating circumstances. Walking across the street on a regular day, probably not a bad, not too hard to do. A hurricane comes blowing through, or it's an ice storm. In our regular everyday life, we may slip and fall. We may get pushed around. That's what would happen to us. There's a degree of uncertainty. But, again, if it's something that the character should just be able to do, just let them do it. They don't have to roll. It's perfectly okay as a dungeon master to say, yeah, that's fine, you don't have to roll. This is what you find. Or, this is what you know. If your character grew up in a town his entire life, and someone says, hey, who's the mayor of that town, and the character didn't write it down, you don't have to say, hey, well, make me a history check or an intelligence check to see if you remember. They've lived there their whole life. Of course they know who it is. There's not really a degree of uncertainty. The player just didn't write it down. So again, you only use die rolls for checks and attacks and things of that nature. You may even rule that for certain attacks. If an enemy is unconscious, paralyzed, bound, and there's no rush to stab this enemy, does your player really need to roll for that? I mean, if someone was bound and tied up and unable to move, and I'm 10 feet away and I'm not rushing, and I want to stab them with a sword, if I wanted to do that in real life, there's really not a lot of circumstances of uncertainty. The moral uncertainty exists, whether or not you should do that, but the physicality of actually doing it, it's perfectly okay to just say, you know what? Given all this, yep, you managed to stab him, you take him out, and move on. That way you don't have to sit there and be, well, go ahead, you have advantage, go ahead and roll with advantage, and then the player misses the immobile target. You know what I mean? So, rule number 1, that may just kind of be, it's not called out as a rule, but the role of the D20 in Dungeons & Dragons in general, but again, we're talking 5th edition here, you only roll when there's a chance of failure. If it's something that will pretty much certainly happen, and there's 0 degree of uncertainty, just let it happen. And the second rule is one I learned about in Adventurers League, and a lot of people are learning about it now from an article that came out from Jeremy Crawford, but it's on page 175 of the Player's Handbook. This is all about using your ability scores, and again, here you can see the DC table, how nearly impossible is a DC 30, and what all the different skills are. But this is a variant rule. It's a variant rule that's allowed to be used in the Adventurers League, so if anything, that should tell you how accepted it is, because that is organized play. Like, one of the options for generating your character stats is rolling 4d6 and dropping the lowest. That's outlawed in Adventure League because it could leave players being really underpowered or overpowered. But it's this right here. Variant. Skills with different abilities. I know a lot of people homebrew some of these, but it's not really homebrew. It's just a rule in the game. Normally, your proficiency and skill applies only to a specific kind of ability check. Proficiency in athletics, for example, usually applies to the strength checks. This is why everywhere in the book and most other sources you read say, make a wisdom perception check. Make a charisma persuasion check. They wouldn't have to call out charisma persuasion check or wisdom perception check if there wasn't a reason to do that. It would just say make a perception check. But they put that ability tag at the front because you can choose via this rule, this variant rule in the player's handbook, to not do that. And I'll give you a couple examples, but we'll continue reading. In such cases, the DM might ask for a check using an unusual combination of ability and skill, or you might ask your DM if you can apply proficiency to a different check. For example, if you have to swim from an offshore island to the mainland, your DM may call for a constitution check to see if you have the stamina to make it that far. In this case, your DM might allow you to apply your proficiency in athletics and ask for a constitution athletics check. So if you're proficient in athletics, you apply your proficiency bonus to the constitution check just as you would normally do for a strength athletics check. And again, in this situation, it's typically a strength athletics check. If this was a short trip and it was very choppy water, I would argue that, yeah, you would need strength because you're fighting the waves. But if you're in light armor and you're not in anything crazy and you're not being weighed down and there's no rush and you're trying to get just across the long distance, yeah, that's constitution. That's your wherewithal to get there. Your body is naturally buoyant to a degree. You will float. So it's not so much an argument of how hard you're paddling to get there. You know, you're trying to fight over the weight of your heavy metal armor. You're just trying to go a long distance, so it tests your endurance, in this case, your constitution. Similarly, this is the one that everybody uses, so I will talk to this one. When your half-orc barbarian uses a display of raw strength to intimidate an enemy, your DM might ask for a strength intimidation check, even though intimidation is normally associated with charisma. Again, that's one that I always use. You can use your strength for your intimidation roll, but you need to make it an intimidation showing off your physicality, showing off your strength. You can't just try to use a threat of something or political threat, I'll expose all of your dark secrets and then make a strength intimidation check. That is not a strength-based intimidation. That is a charisma-based intimidation, possibly even intelligence-based if you're presenting it via fact. But if you were you're going to do what I say, and you smash through a table and are do what I say, that is a physical strength. You just showed off how strong you are. Strength intimidation check. Another one that Jeremy Crawford used in the one article I was referencing, if you're trying to persuade somebody to do something, typically it's a charisma check because you're using your personality and your charm to say hey, why don't you come along and do what I have to say? What do you say? Come on. Come join me. Come join us. Charisma persuasion check. But if you're maybe you're okay, hang on. How about this? If I can do, triple butt standing backflip, you come with us. What do you say? The DM says make a dexterity persuasion check. You're trying to win them over via your acrobatic talent. So your character does. You make the check, you win, you do the triple backflip, you land it. What do you say? Something like that. Or check out how dexterous I am. Or hang on, let me try to push this thing out of the way, and let me use my strength. You should come with us because I'm presenting you with all of these hard-earned facts that I found. This is why you should come with us. Intelligence persuasion check. You get the point. There's a lot of different ways. Not all of these are interchangeable. Some of them, the rule says they are, but some of them you may have to fight a little bit harder to get your DM to buy into why this ability works with this check. Like a strength religion check. doesn't really jump to mind, because that seems more like an intelligence check. But maybe there's a wisdom religion check. It's not like you're trying to remember hard, scripture text that you read, but you're trying to intuit things given the situation based on your wisdom about gods and deities, and you're trying to, almost like an insight check kind of a situation. So there's a lot of play here, but this is a rule here in the player's handbook that a lot of people, I feel like, everybody just sort of, like, this whole chapter, I feel, is heavily looked over. Like the fact that there are passive checks for everything. You can have a passive intimidation check. How intimidating is your character just physically looking at them? A passive insight check, passive arcana checks, things of that nature. And then the section here about working together. The character who's leading the effort and one with the highest ability modifier can make an ability check with advantage, reflecting the help from the other characters. Character can only provide help if the task is one that they can not attempt alone. Like picking a lock, you really can't get assistance from somebody else. And then a section on group checks, and then all the ability scores. But anyway, this was this video, guys. Just a quick discussion of 2 rules that you're probably not using or using correctly, or maybe just not even aware of. You only roll when there's a degree of uncertainty, and that you can use any ability score for any ability check, and that's a handwritten rule, not a homebrew. Right here on page 175 of the player's handbook. Whereas the rolling a d20 only when necessary and uncertainty is involved is page 7. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you next time.